Good afternoon. My name is Ray Kuhl. I'm joined by my friend and colleague Janet Reed today for important content, HIPAA compliance essentials. As Janet says, we want to identify exactly what somebody needs to do, including some training tools that are available that are both cost-effective and effective. Many practices today struggle with HIPAA in a variety of ways, and some of the questions that each of you asked when registering for this webinar gives us good indication about many of the questions that need to be answered. Janet is very, very experienced in working with practices on site over a period of many years, helping with HIPAA compliance issues. And so really happy to have her be the presenter of most of our content today. So if I didn't say it, my name is Ray Kuhl. I'm CEO of PBSI and very blessed to have so many great folks, including Janet, especially Janet, who can help clients. So today's agenda is straightforward. What are the keys to surviving an audit without penalty? What's the difference between breach and incident notification requirements? A very confusing issue we've learned from clients. What are the requirements that you really need to have in your policies and procedures? What are some crucial elements that if you're looking at your security risk assessment, you wondered if you've checked all the boxes correctly? What are the things an auditor really cares about? And then we'll look at both documenting security training and tools for security training, as well as the role in compliance of online monitoring. So thanks for joining. Many of you, thank you very much, are long-term PBSI clients, and it's very gratifying to know that we have relationships that go over decades in many cases. We appreciate and are honored by your support. For some of you, this is your first exposure to PBSI. Our goal of this and all of the webinars we do is to inform and educate. So sure, we have security services to sell, but the goal of these webinars is to inform. And I believe you'll find the content to be really useful. So why we need protection is really straightforward. I think everybody attending this webinar understands the internet is dangerous. Attackers are dangerous. It's important to understand that we're not just protecting against the financial health of the practice against the risk of audit or data breach penalties, but we're legitimately protecting patient information. We all have an obligation and we take it seriously, and so we protect because we have that obligation. So the combination of things that we need to do, we put in place traditional security measures. We won't talk about those today, but the basic building blocks of having a firewall that's effectively set up, making sure all PCs have current antivirus, patch updates that happen automatically every day, and other aspects of security, including training staff. The main content today are risk assessment and compliance standards. Hopefully will help with educating and a look at some employee education tools. So with this, I want to introduce my colleague, Janet Reed. And Janet, take it away.
Good afternoon. Thanks. Good afternoon. Thanks for attending. Just to give you a little bit of background on myself, I've spent my entire career in the healthcare industry and over 20 years here at PBSI. 50% of my time has been spent training software and security out in the medical field. So I know the struggles and the roadblocks that you encounter daily trying to keep your office compliant. So today I'd like to share my experiences with you and help you become HIPAA compliant by giving you tools and tips so you know you will pass an audit. We all have fears of failing an audit or having a breach. And many times I hear the question, what do I need to do to be HIPAA compliant? Just tell me exactly what you want me to do. So we have limited time today, so I want to touch on each of the subjects of what you need to do to be HIPAA compliant. So first we're going to talk about policies and procedures, period, no getting around it. It's required, you have to have them. And what about vendors that have access to your data and business associate agreements? It's for your protection. If they breach your data and you don't have a signed agreement with them, then you will get the fine for non-compliance. And training your employees. It's not one time 5 years ago when they started, but it's at least once a year with periodic reminders throughout the year. And most importantly, complete a risk assessment, one that will pass an audit. It's not a simple checkoff sheet. It's a required document to find out what is lacking and what needs fixing in your medical practice. Auditors are going to want to see this document and want to see the risks that you are proactively working on. Then manage the identified risks. And this is why we have to do it on a yearly basis. Last, complete a disaster recovery plan. And I know you're thinking, oh, I have all that information available. I don't need to write up a plan. But you're required to have a written document on what to do, who to contact, how your employees respond. You know, think of the tornado that passed through Marshalltown, Iowa, and the flooding last week in Pennsylvania. What would happen if that happened to your office? So let's dive into policies and procedures. You know the old saying, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. And how do employees always respond when you tell them something? Oh, I didn't know that. So let's write it down and give it to them so they do know that. Your policies and procedures are the bedrock to your compliance. You know, some practices will just buy a book of policies and procedures online, and that's fine. You can do that, but you have to customize them to fit your office policy. If you don't customize them, then you've wasted your money and you're in violation of HIPAA. OCR has stated that the most common violation found during HIPAA audits were the lack of or outdated policies. And what's the difference between a policy and a procedure? Well, let's see what HIPAA defines as the difference. Each policy defines an organization's approach and defines enforcement and consequences for violations. Procedures describe how the organization carries out that approach. So you must have step-by-step instructions that explain how to implement the policy. So think about if you left your job tomorrow, could the person that's filling your role be able to follow the written policy? Policies and procedures are a requirement. You have to follow a standard business form when creating your policies, which are having a creation date, and then every time you modify it, have the modification date. You need a purpose of the policy, the scope of the policy, any definitions of any acronyms that you used in the policy, a policy statement, which is the intent of the policy. The procedure is a process to fulfill management's intent on how, when, where, why the policy exists, including what job functions are responsible. And then there's the enforcement. What are the penalties if the procedures are not followed? So policies must be modified to meet changing needs of your organization. So if there's any rule changes or any procedures change, then you must document that with your modification date on there. When you complete a risk assessment, you learn about all the policies that are required to be in place. That's what the whole risk assessment is about, making sure that you have all of those policies. And there is a lifespan of a policy and procedure, and that is if your procedure changes or if there's any new law changes. So it's not necessary to recreate the wheel. Like I said, you can purchase policies and procedures, but what is needed is customized policies that will follow what HIPAA said about policies. And that is, policies establish measurable objectives and expectations for the workforce, assign responsibility for decision making, and define enforcement and consequences for violations. Procedures describe how the organization carries out that approach with explicit step-by-step instructions and implement the organization's policies. So I have a graphic here of part of the table of contents of the PBSI Customized Policy and Procedure Manual. This is a 97-page manual that follows the policies and procedures required by HIPAA, the privacy rule, and the security rule. The policies are your guide to what is required in the security risk assessment. And without the policies, you would fail your security risk assessment because that's what you're assessing to, is that you have these policies in place. The table of contents recaps the policies and procedures covered in our manual. And this manual is not your employee handbook. That's different. This is in addition to your employee handbook. Next, I want to show you some samples of the forms that PBSI supplies with your policy and procedure manual. Pictured are a few examples of the logs. Auditors are going to ask to review your employee training log. This is so important. So every time you do any type of training or any time you do a periodic reminder, make sure that you have a sign-in sheet. Make sure that you have the date of the training program, the employee's name and have them sign that sheet that you've given something to them. Next, we were talking about business associate agreements, and this is something that OCR just put out, that they're going to be asking you for this log and for you to upload the log of your business associate agreement. So make sure that you have something in place, have them all together. I always tell everybody to take a file and put all of them together, but have the information available, the name of the business and the address and the contact person, have that available because you might be asked for that in an audit, or not even in an audit. You might just be asked to send that in. The other one is the security incident log. So we all need to have that in place, and you need to make sure that employees are trained on security incidents. They need to know what a security incident is, what a breach is, and know that they have a place where they can report that, and you need to make a log of each one of those. So why does the business associate compliance matter? So any company that you hire that has potential access to your data, they become associate liability for breach. The privacy rule requires that a covered entity obtain assurance from its business associates that they will protect the health information just like you do. The assurances have to be in writing, in a contract or other agreement. If you just went to hhs.gov, they have samples of a business associate agreement that you can download and use. If you had a breach, you'd have a great impact on your company. So the agreement between you and the business associate makes the business associate follow the same rules that you follow. And then the statement from the HHS website that I was just speaking about, it says OCR will be asking covered entities to identify their business associates. We encourage covered entities to prepare a list of each business associate and contact information so they are able to respond to this request. So with that all said, why would you not have a business associate agreement? You know, sometimes it's challenging to know who they are, but that's going to protect you in the case that they cause a breach. If you don't have a contract, then the fine's going to be on you. So think about anyone who sees or has access to patient information. Those are your business associates. Some examples would be a third-party administrator that assists a health plan with claim processing, maybe you have a billing company, a CPA firm who has potential access to data, an attorney whose legal services involve access to protected health information, your shredding vendor. If you have a storage facility that houses records with PHI, an independent medical transcriptionist, a technology company that provides IT services, telemedicine web connection provider. You must have a BAA with them. So training your workforce. I know you probably get some pushback and lack of enthusiasm from management about HIPAA training and spending money on it, but you need to remind them that training is required and it's key to being compliant. There's flexibility in training, so you can make it scalable to your audience. The goal is to protect the privacy and security of the information that we've been entrusted with. HIPAA training should include the laws, but also include practice-specific policies and procedures in regard to PHI. You know, make training realistic to your practice. Give scenarios of situations where PHI was disclosed or where behavior is unacceptable. You know, do some role playing, make it fun. So there's 5 required elements of workforce training. The first is universal application. So everyone in your practice is subject to HIPAA training. It's not just for staff who interact with patients. It's for everyone who comes in contact with protected health information. So that includes all employees, including providers. If you have any students coming in, you need to make sure that they have HIPAA training, contracted employees or volunteers. The HIPAA privacy and security rules require formal education and training of the workforce to ensure ongoing accountability for privacy and security of PHI. You want to define PHI and identify the elements of PHI so that everyone is aware of the risks and the responsibilities. Then you need to review the minimum necessary rule. You would be really surprised. I would challenge you to take a poll of your employees and see who knows what the minimum necessary rule is. A lot of employees don't know what that means. So you need to convey to employees that just because there is authorized access to PHI doesn't mean that all PHI should be shared with all people. You know, what PHI do we normally disclose for a particular task, and what PHI is appropriate to leave on a voicemail. Employees should only have access to minimum information necessary to do their jobs. And this is why HIPAA requires you to monitor and audit user access to patient records. If you did your risk assessment, you would have learned that in the risk assessment, you have to do auditing and make sure that people aren't snooping where they're not supposed to be looking at records. And I would say you should be auditing at least quarterly to make sure that they're following the minimum necessary rule. The next is authorized personnel only. So your EHR should be set up by job function, and access should be set to reflect the job function. That's part of your security risk assessment also. Employee access to PHI must be authorized. And creating a security awareness program that includes security reminders, protection from malicious software, training on login, monitoring, and password management. And then you're required to train employees annually, send periodic reminders. There's no set time frame for reminders, but I would suggest that you do it quarterly. And you're required to document the training sessions with employees' name, date of training, name of the training, a sign-in sheet for each training session with the information is an excellent way to keep this information, and auditors are going to ask you about training. This is an email sent out from OCR last year, and I just want to kind of go over because it talks about train your workforce so they don't get caught by a fish. So OCR states that 10%, that there's a 10% increase in interconnectivity and security-related HIPAA violations of cyber security attacks. Let's get that out. And training your workforce is not only essential, but it's required. Stating, implement a security awareness program for all members of the workforce, including management. You must implement periodic security updates, and an organization's training program should be ongoing and an evolving process. And they talk about how often, biannually, and monthly updates. Reminders to quickly communicate new and emerging cybersecurity information. And documentation of training of a workforce members includes dates, types of training, training materials, and evidence of participation. And auditors will ask for this information. So I went over that, but this is directly an email from the OCR, and they're telling you these are the things that you need to do. So I would suggest that you get on the mailing list for OCR. They send out great information. If you just Google OCR listserv, and listserv is all one word, and you can sign up and get these emails from them. There's terrific information for you to share with your staff. So think about having a training session during a staff meeting, or have a lunch meeting with the staff. You know, order some pizza and spend 30 minutes training your staff. Staff appreciate it when you invest in there. PBSI offers on-site HIPAA training and will come out to your office, train your employees on the HIPAA regulations, including your policies and procedures with regards to PHI, and it's customized for your staff. We supply a customized privacy security handbook for each employee, and having a live instructor allows interaction and questions, and you'll uncover issues that employees are struggling with and learn a lot from their questions. Staff take a test at the end of the session with 20 multiple choice questions, and it takes about 15 to 20 minutes to complete, and then we mail you a certificate for each employee. Next, we'll talk about the security risk analysis. So it's made up of two parts, the risk assessment and the security of IT infrastructure. The most important requirement of the security rule is to complete the security risk assessment. The risk assessment gives us guidelines to find risk and vulnerability in our security and day-to-day procedures. In essence, it's a list of questions that help us to assess where we are vulnerable. If you are participating in MIPS or you participated in meaningful use, The number one core objective it was and it still is to complete the risk assessment. So if you pass meaningful use, then the very first question you attested to was that you completed the security risk assessment. So our goal is to produce a detailed report to close compliance gaps. The security rule also states that you must secure your IT infrastructure. You are required to have monitoring in place to make sure you safeguard the integrity of your data. So are your software patches up to date on each device? Do you have an up-to-date antivirus or computer scan for virus? Who's watching out for all of this? There's ways to automate this process. Ask us if you need help or have questions. What are the steps to completing the risk assessment? So we start out by taking an inventory of your practice. You're going to inventory all the devices where electronic PHI is stored or has potential to be stored. And it's always a good idea to have this information anyways. That's part of your emergency preparedness plan. So if you had to report theft or fire or you need this information, it's always a good idea to have that listed. But some examples of where ePHI is stored would be on your server, backups, laptops, tablets, anybody bringing their own device from home, desktops, PCs, fax machines, copiers, unfortunately cell phones, dictaphones, X-ray, EKGs, any software like your EHR, Word, Excel, email. And then we're going to examine the people and processes that have access to your PHI. That's when you get out your policy and procedure manual. The security rule will give you guidelines of what policies you need to have in place. And you'll probably find that you will need to write and address many procedures that most likely are currently happening at your office. Steps that will assure that your data stays safe and keeps you from a PHI breach. But we're focused on a goal of creating a culture of compliance, and so make that the theme of your office. And then look at your technology. Who's remoting in? What is encrypted or should be? Who's using your wireless access or text messaging? Contact your IT support team to help you with this section. So after you've done your research, gathered the necessary information, you need to document, train, and implement policies. So what is the best plan for you? There's not a given format that HIPAA requires you to use for the security risk assessment, but there are many tools that are out there. What is required is that you address the safeguards set for the security rule. So you can always try it yourself. There's downloadable tools available, but you'll need to engage your IT company because there's questions that typically you would not know answers to. So do your research, understand the question so you give the right answer. You might decide to add some outside expertise to complete or review your security risk assessment. So I'd like to show you one of the tools that we use here at PBSI for a security risk assessment, and it's the tool that's recommended by ONC. Okay, that's going to open. Okay, so here's an example. So we start with that inventory that I talked about. So a lot of times you can get this information from your IT supplier. If we did your online monitoring, then we would supply this for you. And this is really a good tool. You always need to have this updated. It has all of your assets and the serial numbers, and then we'll just list whether or not they process any ePHI. So that's our inventory. And then next we'll go through a screening process. So we have screening questions out here that'll talk about roles and responsibilities and external parties, risk and management compliance, and you'll answer each one of those either addressed, partially addressed, or not addressed. So after we would come in and we would talk to you and ask you these certain questions, and we would know where you're at. So that's the whole idea of the security risk assessment, is that you're going to find out where you're lacking and what you can work on. So after we do the screening questions, then we'll go through the people and process steps that are using your and have access to the data. So we'll have a threat vulnerability statement, and then we'll give you some recommended control measures, and then we'll see what your existing control is. And we'll see if the existing control is effective, partially effective, not effective, and then it'll give us a score on exposure potential. And then we'll see what the likelihood is if we were to have that compromised. Is it likely, not likely, very likely? And then what the impact would be if we were to be compromised. And then that'll give us a risk rating. Next, we'll go to technology, and we'll do exactly the same thing. And then at the very end, which is the most important page, will be our remediation and findings. So this will give us a list of every high and medium risk. And this is what HIPAA wants you to be working on. So they don't expect you to do your security risk assessment and have everything in order, and that's why we do it annually. It needs to be updated every single year, and if they come in and they audit you, they're going to look at this page and they're going to see, well, what are you working on? So we don't want it to just be blank with what the additional steps are. We want to be working on each one of these. So there are benefits of having a professional to help you with a security risk assessment and your policy and procedure manuals, because we do the research and the documentation for you. So get a set of fresh eyes to look over how you're securing your data and how your staff is handling the data you entrusted them with. You know, you're busy, the job takes time and resources to complete. So reduce your risk and your fear of audits and improve the quality of your procedures. Sometimes you need to let the professional be the fall guy to help you get employees to follow the rules. Sometimes it's just much easier coming from an outsider. So if you attested to meaningful use, please make sure that you have this risk assessment in place. I've helped many practices through audits, and trust me, you do not want to tell your doctors that you failed the audit, because that means they're taking the money back that you already spent. So after today's webinar, I have 2 handouts that will be sent out to each person attending. The first one is a security self-assessment. Now, this is not your security risk assessment, but like it's a self-assessment that helps to see where you are and where your risks are, and what you have documented and what you do not have documented. The next is, this is a document from CMS, and it just goes over security risk assessment, some myths and facts that we have all had questions on, and they published this and wanted to send that out to you also. That's real helpful. So with permission from a client, I wanted to share with you my personal experience of last year's meaningful use audit. So even though HIPAA said audits in 2017 were going to be desk audits, this audit was done on site. The client received an email in late November last year requesting an audit of meaningful use for 2014. They had a list of pre-screening questions and also requested a report of all patients seen and their insurance package in the all patients seen and a listing of their insurance packages in the year of 2014. So these documents were requested to be uploaded to the auditor secure portal. So we prepared in advance, was supplying the client with the needed report, and then we prepped the staff, and we had our policies and procedures and our security risk assessment ready to go. The auditor went through every single attestation question on the meaningful use attestation and required print screens for all the measures that did not involve patients. And for patient visit measures, required the list of each patient visit and whether they met or did not meet the measure. The auditor reviewed the procedure and policy manual, all of our training logs, looked through the security risk assessment, and then asked us for a copy of the risk assessment findings and remediation page. That was the page that she was most interested in because she wanted to see what we were working on. And the auditor was there approximately like 2 hours, and we had some follow-up with her for the next few days. She was very nice and pleasant, but it was nerve-wracking. She asked for more printed information than we expected, and within a week of turning in all the needed reports, the practice received word that they passed the audit. And if you think that this happens just to the big guys, this is a practice in a very small town with 3 providers, not a huge office. So you need to be prepared for that to come to your office also. So how do we prepare in advance for a successful audit? We start documenting. We do the security risk assessment, and without it, it's an automatic fail of meaningful use and MIPS. You need an assignment of a privacy officer with a job description. You need that security incident log and security incident report documentation. Employee HIPAA training log. I can't say it enough. Annual training with frequent reminders. Each employee needs to sign an employee sanction policy. That would come out of your policies and procedures manual. Each employee needs to know what their employee responsibilities are, and that needs to be signed by each employee. A policy and procedure manual including all the aspects of the HIPAA privacy and security rules, and your security risk assessment is your guide to the needed policies. Auditors are going to talk to your staff. They did at the day that they were there at our pediatrician office. They talked to staff and asked them questions, and I was thankful that we did prep and talk to our staff to make sure that they were prepared for that. And lastly is the emergency disaster recovery plan. So Dan Irwin is the security advisor at Dow Chemical Company, and I thought this statement that he made was right on. He said the best way to get management excited about a disaster plan is to burn down the building across the street. So it shouldn't take a disaster to make us notice and make sure that we have all of our ducks in a row to secure our patient data and keep our practice functioning. The security rule states that you have a contingency plan for disasters and emergencies. And most of the time we wait, we put that on the back burner. I'm showing you a list of what needs to be included in your disaster recovery plan. Doesn't have to be a really hard process. There's many templates online. We also provide assistance with writing and testing an emergency disaster plan for your practice. But I'll just read briefly what needs to be included. So of course, you need your authors, the date you originally wrote it, any updates to it. How do you plan to stay in business? What locations would you use as alternative locations? Who is your primary emergency personnel and spokesperson? What's the emergency contact information? And then you need to say, what are the potential disasters that could happen in your area? You need an emergency planning team, coordination with others, insurance question attestation, our critical operations, fire safety attestation, evacuation and shelter plans, utility backup, reducing potential damage attestation, employee skills, if you have anybody that speaks a foreign language or has medical training, or engineering. Those people should be set aside and have a list of them. How do you communicate to your employees? Do they know when to come back to work? Co-workers with disabilities, cybersecurity safety attestation, records backup responsibility, what kind of support do you have for your employees? Where would you get a loan? How about legal continuity, employee emergency contact information, and this requires an annual review. What are the steps to avoid audit? Red flags, so document your progress. Your security assessment is ongoing. Make sure you have a HIPAA security action log that it has the findings page, the security risk assessments I demonstrated. Document what you found lacking upon your initial assessment and update and implement required employee forms. Implement an employee training program and make sure you have security incident logs. Does your staff know how and who to report a security incident to? Not every incident results in a breach, but you must document and investigate. So make entries, and they can be handwritten. If an auditor sees your staff has reported a violation, it's a good thing because the staff's paying attention. And then document corrective actions taken after each violation, the conversations, any emails or meetings, and how responsively did you correct, communicate, and update the policies. Secure all your EPHI. The single most important item, once you learn, you must address. Encrypted data is excluded from breach. Remember that. If it was me, I'd have BitLocker encryption on every laptop and teach your employees about hard passwords. They're good passwords. Security must be part of your culture and you must be able to prove it. So now you know exactly what you need to do. So the goal today was to inform you of security requirements, and I thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, please feel free to call me anytime. My information is right there. I look forward to hearing from you. I'm going to turn the presentation back over to Ray, who's going to demonstrate some of the tools available to keep you HIPAA compliant, and we'll answer questions at the end.
Great, Janet. Thank you very much. We promised 45 minutes, so we have 10 minutes left. I'm going to be really quick with a couple of things. A part of compliance, which Janet has talked about, is to be able to demonstrate some things. There are inexpensive and supportable tools that we provide. You can also get these things from other places. But real quickly, security monitoring, which those of you who have attended many PBSI webinars, you've heard me talk about this over and over. Very inexpensive way to make sure your antivirus is up to date, your patches are up to date, and if anything takes place security-wise, it's immediately identified. Specific component I'm going to just really quickly demonstrate is a part of that monitoring called data breach risk intelligence. So the many PBSI clients who are in attendance, virtually all of you are covered with PBSI's online security monitoring antivirus. A subset of you have had us install this data breach risk intelligence. So if you're a client and you don't know that this is installed for you and you'd like to ask about it, just send us an email. It's inexpensive, it's easy, and what this does is it finds all unprotected, meaning unencrypted PHI on any device within the organization, servers, PCs, laptops. So I'm going to just really quickly show you what that looks like and why it can be useful. And then I want to talk about a really key component. Janet has talked about training, and she described that we can do on-site training or we can do recorded online training. At PBSI, we've adopted KnowBe4 as our internal security training program. We've implemented this for many clients. I'd really recommend that if you don't have an easy, cost-effective, self-documenting process for HIPAA training, that you really look at KnowBe4. So with this, I'm going to go do a short demonstration of data breach risk intelligence. So what you're seeing on my screen is PBSI's live monitoring dashboard. So the idea on the left-hand side is a list of clients. I've selected only PBSI. Our technicians that are monitoring this dashboard all day long have the view of all clients. So the idea is in the north panel over here, the most problematic device would be listed at the top. So if I listed all clients, the server that is most problematic, meaning maybe it's down or it hasn't reported into the monitoring dashboard in over an hour or something like that, those would be critical items that would come to the top. Since I've selected just PBSI, these are servers at PBSI. So I'm going to go to workstations, which is where we find the action is in terms of security and risk intelligence. And what I'm going to do is, among all of the PCs at PBSI, the idea there's one PC here that shows some red, and that's Ray's Microsoft Surface. And if I wanted to drill down and find out why that reported something, I would see that backup and recovery has failed, probably because Ray had this turned off. So the whole idea of this dashboard is that technicians are alerted to incidents that take place that need attention. So I'm going to just real quickly demonstrate. Some of you may have seen this before. I'm going to look at the data breach risk intelligence that we have set up, and I'm going to use my own PC. So this that I've selected in the north panel is the PC at which I'm sitting right now. It's my desktop PC at my desk. And down below, here's a list of all the things that a technician can see, whether the antivirus is up to date, patches are up to date, anything malfunctioning. And specifically what I want to look at right now is the status of the data breach risk scan that was run on Ray's PC last night. So this is something that nobody goes to each individual PC and drills into it and asks, how's Ray's PC? How's Jan's PC? How's Karen's PC? That's ridiculous. But instead, there are highlights that say, we ran a new scan and there was an increase in the amount of data that showed. And so on Ray's PC, it found last night what it considers to be $4,000 worth of unprotected, meaning unencrypted data, which includes some social security numbers, some MasterCard numbers, and some dates of birth. And then it goes on to identify what did it find on Ray's PC. So it found Ray and Kristen's federal tax return that's got a Social Security number in it. Sure enough, I do have that stored there, so I'll be removing it. If there were things in my recycle bin, they would show up there. I have, and you can see this is data that really, why would this be scanned? There's no risk as long as my PC is protected, but if a hacker got inside of our network, one of our employees clicked on the wrong thing, and now somebody has access, and they get to Ray's PC or a shared hard drive, what could they find? Well, here's an example where I have a dummy spreadsheet out there that looks like their Social Security numbers, and I do that so it'll show up on this scan. These are the kinds of documents that a hacker could get access to. Before you get compromised, make sure your data is cleaned up to the point where there isn't anything that's exposed that would be dangerous if they did have access. So one other thing this is really useful for is documenting that you in fact have recorded the status of where all your PHI in your network is, and also that you have an active process of doing something about it. So data breach risk scanning adds, I think it's $3 a month per PC to do risk scanning on all of your PCs, and you don't have to do it on all PCs. So in fact, this is useful to know. If you have, let's just say 15 PCs in your organization, whoever does your payroll may have some Social Security numbers, whoever your executives are that might have employee Social Security number information, human resources, billing managers in a medical office that might have a report that it would include Social Security numbers and PHI, billing staff, transcriptionists, not necessarily so at the front desk PCs or PCs that are in exam rooms and aren't used for anything but recording data. So you don't have to have scans run on all of your PCs once you've identified that many or most never have any exposed PHI. Okay, so risk intelligence. My last thing that I'm going to demonstrate real quickly, I'm going to move on to a different topic, and this is ongoing security training. So what I'm going to demonstrate is from a company called KnowBe4. KnowBe4 provides security training. Specifically, they include HIPAA training. So there's two ways to go about this training. One is we set up a training program, and you ongoing have training done on a regular basis, either monthly or quarterly, or certainly no less than quarterly, and you record and it auto-documents the results of the training. That is the best way to use KnowBe4. Have an ongoing process that PBSI can set up, and we've done this for so many clients, including ourselves. We know how to set these up and which templates to use. But you can have HIPAA training done this way, and you can have security training done this way. There's a second option, and that is to have us do this for you one time. So this is a new option we've never offered before, where you have access to all the training materials for 21 days, and we'll set it up for you. You can access all of your employees, all the training you wish to over a 21-day period, and then stop. That's not ideal because what you really want is ongoing, but some practices say, I just want a way to make sure my employees get trained with materials that are effective and proven, and I am not going to engage in ongoing training. So real quickly, how's this look? First of all, we choose emails that go to employees. So the emails can either be phishing emails, like if I look most recently updated, a phishing email that tries to fake somebody into logging into Instagram. But specifically, if all we're going to do is HIPAA security training, there are training emails we can send out. So here is an example. HIPAA tips to remember. This comes in an employee's email. I have to acknowledge that they received it. We proved and have documentation that we provided that to every employee. Then at a separate occasion, more tips to remember, and so forth. So there are some materials that are designed to be educational, presented by email. We know that the employees received them. We can prove it and easily document it. More comprehensive than that, no difference in cost, but you have access to all of the materials. I'm going to look for materials that are available for HIPAA. And we've spent a long time. There's new content created all the time, and we're evaluating it and including in, like, see this thing that calls already added. Already added, that means we've evaluated this and we've already added it to the mix of things that we recommend clients take a look at. So here's a training module. This is a 15-minute video. Sorry, I click on the right thing. And I'm certainly not going to go through a 15-minute video. In fact, I'm not going to display this because we're out of time. But what you'll see is that the video in 15 minutes goes through all the basic elements of HIPAA, and it includes quizzes. So it stops and says, so answer this question, answer that question, and then it says, you were right, you were wrong, here's more information, this is why these choices were right or wrong, and more information. So it's really useful, it's effective, 15 minutes. There's another one that we use that's really, really good, and 60 minutes might not seem concise, but it's very well done, it's very complete, and again, it includes quizzes. So there's more than one choice that you have, but by using KnowBe4, you have access to all these materials. And either a one-time fee, you can have this done for all of your employees for between $200 and $500, depends on the size of the organization, or you can have an ongoing process where we set it up once and then you pay $3 a month per employee for ongoing training. So again, I hope you understand the purpose of what we're doing today. What we've done is not to sell services so much as to inform. And to me, I hate when somebody tells me about a problem, and that's all they do. So we're also including how do you solve it. We got a couple of questions from clients which were very pointed and very similar, and I'm going to read one of them. As a private practice, how can we financially afford to maintain HIPAA security compliance? Well, many of us listening relate to that question. How can we afford to? Well, of course, truly the answer is you can't afford not to. The risk of auditing and penalties are just too significant to ignore, but you can use cost-effective tools. So if you think about $3 a month per employee to have training resources that you know you've provided, they're professionally done, you have automatic documentation that the training's been provided, you've gone a long way to actually train your employees and also to avoid audit questions. So contact us if you're interested in one-time training, ongoing training, data breach scanning, online backup. There's other security services that we offer, but I just want you to know we're available. And we're finished with webinar. I want to thank you for your attendance. And again, for many of you who are PBSI clients over a long, long period of time, you are much appreciated. And for those of you where this is your first exposure, I hope you found this very helpful.